A Star in the West Chapter 4, A Star in the West, or, A Humble Attempt to Discover the Long-Lost 10 Tribes See Israel, preparatory to their return to the beloved city, Jerusalem book by Elias Boudinot published in 1816 Chapter IV. The Indian traditions are received by their nations. As the Indian nations have not the assistance afforded by the means of writing and reading, they are obliged to have recourse to tradition, as Dupratz, 2 volume 169, has justly observed, to preserve the remembrance of remarkable transactions or historica facts, and this tradition cannot be preserved, but by frequent repetitions. Consequently many of their young men are often employed in hearkening to the old beloved men, narrating the history of their ancestors, which is thus transmitted from generation to generation. In order to preserve them pure and incorrupt, they are careful not to deliver them indifferently to all their young people, but only to those young men of whom they have the best opinion. They hold it as a certain fact, as delivered down from their ancestors, that their forefathers, in very remote ages, came from a far distant country, by the way of the west, where all the people were of one color, and that in process of time they moved eastward to their present settlements. This tradition is corroborated by a current report among them, related by the old Chickasaw Indians to our traders, that now about 100 years ago, there came from Mexico, some of the old Chickasaw nation, or as the Spaniards call them Chichimecas, in quest of their brethren, as far north as the Aquapa nation, above 130 miles above the Natchez, on the southeast side of the Mississippi River, but through French policy, they were either killed or "sent back, so as to prevent their opening a brotherly intercourse with them, as they had proposed. It is also said, that the Nahuatacas believed that they dwelt in another region before they settled in Mexico. That their forefathers wandered 80 years in search of it, through a strict obedience to the commands of the Great Spirit, who ordered them to go in quest of new lands, that had such particular marks as were made known to them, and they punctually obeyed the divine mandate, and by that means found out and settled that fertile country of Mexico. Our southern Indians have also a tradition among them which they firmly believe, that of old time, their ancestors lived beyond a great river. That 9 parts of their nation, out of 10, passed over the river, but the remainder refused, and stayed behind. That they had a king when they lived far to the west, who left 2 sons. That one of them, with a number of his people, traveled a great way for many years, till they came to Delaware River, and settled there. That some years ago, the king of the country from which they had emigrated, sent a party in search of them. This was at the time the French were in possession of the country on the river Allegheny. That after seeking 6 years, they found an Indian who led them to the Delaware towns, where they stayed 1 year. That the French sent a white man with them on their return, to bring back an account of their country, but they have never been heard of since. It is said among their principal, or beloved men, that they have it handed down from their ancestors, that the book which the white people have was once theirs. That, while they had it they prospered exceedingly, not but that the white people bought it of them, and learnt many things from it, while the Indians lost their credit, offended the Great Spirit, and suffered exceedingly from the neighboring nations. That the Great Spirit took pity on them and directed them to this country. That on their way they came to a great river, which they could pass, when God dried up the waters and they passed over dry shod. They also say that their forefathers were possessed of an extraordinary divine spirit, by which they foretold future events, and controlled the common course of nature, and this they transmitted to their offspring, on condition of their obeying the sacred laws. That they did by these means bring down showers of plenty on the beloved people. But that this power, a long time past, had entirely ceased. The reverend gentleman mentioned in the introduction, for West a White who had taken so much pains in the year 1764 or 5, to travel far westward, to find Indians who had never seen a white man, informed the writer of these memoirs, that far to the northwest of the Ohio, he attended a party of Indians to a treaty, with Indians from the Mississippi. Here he found the people he was in search of. He conversed with their beloved man who had never seen man before, by the assistance of 3 grades of interpreters. The Indian informed him, that one of their most ancient traditions was, that a great while ago, they had a common who lived towards the rising governed the whole world. That white people's heads were under his feet. That he had 12 sons, by whom he administered his government. That his authority was derived from the Great Spirit, by virtue of some special gift from him. That the 12 sons behaved very bad and tyrannized over the people, abusing their power to a great degree, so as to offend the Great Spirit exceedingly. That he being thus angry with them, suffered the white people to introduce spirituous liquors among them, made them drunk, stole the special gift of the Great Spirit from them, and by this means usurped the power over them, and ever since the Indians' heads were under the white people's feet. but that they also had a tradition, that the time would come, when the Indians would regain the gift of the Great Spirit from the white people, and with it their ancient power, when the white people's heads would be again under the Indians' feet.
They called him Kukulkan, the feather serpent god.